Alright, good morning everyone. Welcome back to our class. And today we are going to look at part 3 of teaching listening. So far we have covered all these 5 points. And now we're going to cover in this part an interactive model of listening comprehension, the types of listening performance that can happen in your class, the types of items and tasks for assessing listening objective and competencies in the NSSCO syllabus, as well as look at how the listening is assessed during the examination for the NSSCO level. All right, now we're going to start with the interactive model of listening comprehension. Here we're talking about basically what is involved, what processes are involved in one to comprehend what they are listening. We have 7 processes which have been adapted from Coral and Richards, and what we have to understand is that the initial process or step and the final process, because we have 7 of them, they stay the same. But then in between, the 5 processes that are also involved may happen in different stages and not necessarily in the sequence that they are going to be presented. And they say that they sometimes happen simultaneously, but happen at a very fast pace. So these are the steps. These are the ones that we have, the processes that we have, and they are first decoding auditory sounds, and then the second one is determining the function of the speech. The third, activating schematic. Fourth, assigning literal meaning. 5, assigning intended meaning. 6, determining the demand for short-term or long-term memory. And the last one, the 7th, is retaining essential information or meaning. So what do they mean exactly? What are they involved in? So in the first step here, the learner, hears a stream of speech, and then from this stream of speech, like what they call the raw speech, they create an image, and then this image constitute things like, the clauses, phrases, cohesion marker that they hear, the intonation, as well as the stress pattern of what they hear. All right, and in the second step, here in the second step, which is determining the function of the speech event, here we're looking at the learner then determining what is the purpose of the stream of speech that they're hearing. Is it to either persuade someone? Is it to request some sort of information, exchange some pleasantries, complimenting or greeting? Is it to affirm something? Is it to deny? Or is it to inform? What is the purpose? They have to determine, at this stage they determine, what is the purpose of what they are listening to. And then in the third process, which is activating schematic, it has everything to do with learners then associating what they are hearing with their own lifetime background and experiences and knowledge. All right, associating that with the message that they are hearing. And then in the fourth step, which is assigning literal meaning, here they listen, they pay attention to what has been said, the exact words that have been said, and their meaning. All right, so that's what happens in this state. So yeah, just what is being said, and it's the exact meaning. So that's what they have to do here, what is said, and then associating it or assigning the exact meaning of what they have heard. Oh, I'm repeating myself there so much more. And then in the fifth process is assigning intended meaning, because sometimes when you hear information, right, it does not always mean what the literal meaning of the word is. So here now the learners need to determine what does the speaker really intend to say from the speech or whatever that they are saying. Okay, and then what do they intend to mean? Like reading between the lines to get what the speaker is saying. And then in the next step, which is determining the demand for short-term and or long-term memory. Here we are talking about basically the learners then assigning the information or determining, not assigning, but determining whether they should keep this information in the short-term memory, like they don't need to remember it for longer, or to keep it in the long-term memory to remember it at some point, right? Because if it's not important, right, if it's some facts that are not important for them to remember, then they'll keep them in the short-term memory and forget about them. But then if they are important information that they will need at a later stage, then they'll keep it in their long-term memory. So they have to determine. So for instance, if it's information that they are going to be examined later, like let's say it's the beginning of the year and they know that this information is going to be examined at the end of the semester, which is like a few months from the first month of the beginning of the year, or they know that they're going to be assessed this in the final examination, then obviously they're going to keep this information in the long-term memory. But then if it's just something that they are reading about and it has no impact whatsoever, then they will keep it, or it's not necessary for them to remember, then they'll keep it in the short-term memory, as an example. And then the final step, which is retaining essential information. That is now to say that here the learners then delete any unnecessary information, right? And then only remember the most important information, right? Only the essential informational meaning that they keep or hold on to. Everything else they delete. So that's the processes that are involved in the listening. And then, as I've said, the first and the last always stays in these positions, but then these ones, they happen in different or simultaneously or in different order, depending on what they are listening to. Now we're going to look at the types of classroom listening performance, like the performance that the learners can possibly do in the classroom. We have 6 of them, and we will start with the first one, which is reactive listening. Reactive listening is basically learners listening to something and then saying it back to you. All right? And so the role of the learner here could possibly be a tape recorder, and is very limited because the listener is not really generating any meaningful utterances. It's just repeating what they have been told. And then about the role that reactive listening can play is that in an interactive classroom is a brief choral or individual drills that focus on pronunciation. So that's what we can do in a reactive listening performance in the classroom. And then 2, we have got the intensive listening. Here, the purpose is basically to focus on components such as phonemes, words, intonation, discourse markers, etc. of a discourse that may be considered to be intensive as opposed to extensive in their requirement that the students single out certain elements of spoken language. So here we're focusing on certain part of what has been spoken, and that's what intensive is about, like focusing on certain aspects. And then they include bottom-up skills that are important at all level of proficiency. And for example, the performance that can happen in the intensive requirement, intensive focus performance may include things like students listening for cues in a certain choral or individual drills. And then the teacher repeats a word or sentence several times to imprint it into the student's mind. So the teacher could really repeat something that the learners need to focus on, that they can remember that. Not necessarily need having them to repeat that over, but here we're talking about focusing on a certain part, let's say a word or a phrase that you want them to remember. And then here the teacher can also ask learners to listen to a sentence or a longer stretch of discourse and to notice specified elements such as intonation, stress, contraction or grammatical structure. Next, we are looking at the responsive performance. Here, the significant proportion of the classroom listening activity consists of short stretches of teacher language designed to elicit, to get immediate responses. To understand, like getting immediate responses. The student's task in such a listening is to process the teacher's talk immediately and to fashion an appropriate reply. So here is really wanting the learners to react or respond to what the teacher says. For example, this may include asking questions like, how are you today? What did you do last night? Asking questions and then giving command, and then they need to respond. All right. Take a sheet of paper and pencil. So they need to respond by taking a piece of paper and the pencil. Next, asking clarification. What was that word you said? And then here, checking comprehension. So, how many people were in the elevator when the power went off? Do you understand? So, those are some of the things, like some of the things that the teacher could do, or the students or learners can ask other other students, and then they have to respond. All right, so that's what we have there. And then we have got selective listening. Performance, okay, selective performance, where in longer stretches of discourse, such as monologue of a couple of minutes or considerable longer, the task of the student is not to process everything that was said, but rather to scan the material selectively for certain information. It's like really selecting certain information. Okay. And then the purpose of such performance is not to look for global meaning or general meaning necessarily, but to be able to find important information in a field of potential distracting information. It's like it's a longer piece of discourse, but then they only need to select specific information that they are expected to select from. And then such activity requires field independence in the part of the learner. So field independence, not field independent, but field independence. And then the selective listening differs in the intensive listening in that the discourse is relatively longer than the one that they are provided with in the intensive listening. So examples of such discourse include speeches, media broadcasts, stories and anecdotes, conversation in which learners are eavesdropper, like listening into a conversation that they're not supposed to be listening to. All right, and then techniques promoting selective listening skills could ask students to listen for, let's say, people's names, dates, certain facts or events, location, situation, context, main ideas, and or conclusion. So those are some of the things that they could do in the selective performance in listening. And then number 5, we have got extensive listening. Here, this type of performance, unlike intensive processing, the one that we have just looked at in item 2, described above, aims here is to develop a top-down or global understanding of what has been said. So for the students in a classroom, extensive performance typically involve listening to lectures and other impromptu teacher monologue, commonly referred to academic listening. All right. And then, so such listening may require the learners to invoke other interactive skills, such as, so as they listen, they take notes, they ask questions, they discuss for full comprehension. However, sometimes conversation involves attending to a long story, explanation or description require the learner or the hearer to derive a comprehensive meaning or purpose as they listen, all right, to this type of longer discourse. And then the last one, we have got the interactive performance. So this one is the type of performance that include all the 5 types of performance that we have just looked at. So the learner actively participate in discussion. For example, they debate, they have conversations, they do role plays and other pair and group work. So it means that they do all the other performance because it's interactive. So here they will listen selectively. They may need to repeat certain utterances that they've heard. They will listen for specific information. They will have to respond. Do you understand? So it's more interactive, it's longer. Okay? The learner's listening performance is intricately integrated with other skills, such as speaking or even writing, or it could be reading as well. Do you understand? But then it should happen in such a authentic, give and take, communicative interchange. So that's what happens in this type of performance. Now we are moving on to the next part, which is assessing types of listening. And here we are going to look at 4 types of tasks that we can do, we can use in the classroom to assess listening. All right, the first type of task that you can do in the classroom is the intensive listening task, whereby the learners distinguish phonemic pairs such as grass, glass, leaf, leaf, and then distinguishing morphological pairs such as miss, missed, and then distinguishing stressed pattern, I can go, I can't go. Do you understand? Paraphrase recognition, I come from Taiwan, I'm Taiwanese. Repetition, such as S repeats a word, so things like that. And then the second one is a responsive listening task, asking questions, all right, such as what time is it? Multiple choice responses, or questions where what time is it, and then it's open-ended responses. Simple discourse sequence such as hello, nice weather, tough test. Okay, responsive is like it's a discourse. Do you understand? But then they need to give some sort of responses. So the second one is responsive listening task. Here we have already spoken about the type responsive performance task, right? Like the learners need to respond in some ways. So here we have got the question. So as an example, we have got question, and the responses might be multiple choice responses, and then they select one that is appropriate. Or here is a question, but then they respond with in a sense of an open-ended response that they provide to the question. Simple discourse sequence, all right? So that's what we could have. And then when simple discourse sequences, and then they need to respond in some ways. Do you understand? And then here, the next one, we have got selective listening tasks, whereby we have got listening close. So the students fill in some blanks. Verbal information transfer. Here, students give some sort of multiple choice verbal responses. And next, we have got picture cued information transfer, where the students need to choose a picture, for instance, when they hear a certain utterance or discourse. And then chart completion, students fill in a grid. And then the last one, we've got sentence repetition. This is not the only list we have, but these are just examples that you can do. And sentence repetition, here we're talking about students repeating stimuli sentence. So, and then we have got the fourth one, which is extensive listening task. Extensive listening task, dictation. Students listen usually 3 times or so, and then they write a paragraph. Dialogue, students hear dialogue, and then they answer multiple choice comprehension questions. And then, or they could hear dialogue, and students will hear dialogue, and then they answer open-ended questions. They provide open-ended responses. Or they could listen to a lecture, and then they need to take notes, summarize the lecture, list the main point, etc. And interpretive task, where they could the students could hear a poem, and then they interpret the meaning. Or last but not least, they could hear a stories or narrative, and then they need to retell the story. So that's what we have now in the extensive listening. And those are now the ways that we could assess the learners listening in the classroom. All right, now we are moving on to the listening skills and strategies, as well as look at the objectives and competencies that are stipulated in the NSSCO syllabus. Before we look at the skills and strategies of listening in the form of objectives in the syllabus, let's look at the differences between skills and strategies as well as their benefits. And I think the differences we've already looked at before, right, in the classroom, in previous lessons. Language learners who are active listeners use a range of skills and strategies to direct and manage their listening process according to their communication goals. So it's like they need to use both, and there is a difference between the two. And I think we have spoken about that when we're talking about reading strategies, right? And listening skills are acquired abilities that enable a person to listen without a greater deal of deliberate effort or conscious planning. So they are the results of action that they have practiced frequently and in varied situations, and through prolonged experiences, the action become automatized. All right, so that's what we mean by a skill. It becomes really natural part of them. They don't need to think about it. They don't really need to plan. As they listen, it just happens automatically. While the listening strategies, on the other hand, are the ways of listening that are planned, consciously adapted to improve comprehension and communication, as well as cope with listening difficulties. So here the listening strategy is one that the learners really need to think about, they need to plan about, to improve their communication, to improve coping with whatever listening difficulties that they may experience. Right? Strategies that direct attention to the input and coordinate various cognitive processes are often known as metacognitive strategies. So the ones that are directed to input, direct attention to input and coordinate various cognitive processes, those ones are called now the metacognitive strategies. They broadly consist of strategies for planning, monitoring, evaluating, and they can be used before, during, and after the listening, right? And then listening strategy can also be expected to develop into automatized listening skills with time. So the more the learners practice these strategies that you teach them, that they are exposed to, the more they become skills. More critically, learners will also constantly move between skills and strategies while they're listening to different kinds of discourse with different levels of challenges. And this is sometimes even happens with competent listeners, all right, at times. So as we have seen at the very beginning of this part, that a proficient listener uses both strategies and skills, and then they can alternate depending on the type of listening and the difficulty level of the discourse that they are listening to. Now, let's look at the listening objectives and competencies as stipulated in the NSSCO syllabus. Here we can see that we have got the listening objectives and the competencies. So the first one is listening to understand a range of texts, right? Listening to understand a range of texts, and what are some of the skills that they need to be able to do. And then, when you look at these skills, these competencies, these are now what we call skills and strategies. Now it just depends on how the learners use this, how they are able to perform this. Do they use it automatically, or do they need and plan and think about them? Right. So here we have got demonstrate understanding of instruction, use context to work out meaning of difficult words, use topic, title, pictures to ascertain ascertain specific purpose of listening, make prediction and confirm prediction, listen to sift and sort information such as take notes, use graphic organizer, categorize, you build background knowledge or any given topic by viewing, discussing, generating ideas to add to comprehension. All right, identify general and main ideas, content, gist of a speech heard. Right? And then here infer the speaker infer what the speaker is implying, evaluate and reflect on the information heard, respond appropriately, use information heard to complete a given task, ask relevant and appropriate questions to clarify what had been heard, identify arguments within a speech. So this is just to say, like, as you read through this and then thinking about all that we have looked at, the listening performance, the type of task that you can use, type of task that you can do in the classroom to assess listening, to understand all these things that we have covered before. They are so much related to this. So with this, like knowing that this is the competency or the objective that we have in the classroom, then you determine, so how am I going to assess? What type of activities am I going to do? What type of performance are the learners going to do in the classroom? Do you understand? You can relate all this. Like, so if you have this objective, what kind of task can you do? You can refer back to that information that you have just covered earlier. And then next, distinguishing between different types of questions and responses. So all these are related to listen to understand a range of text. And then these are the competencies that the learners need to be able to do. And then I would say that I cannot go through all of them. I would suggest that you go through them with your time. And then as you read these competencies and objectives, think about then what type of tasks can you do? What type of performance can the learners, tasks can you create? What type of performance that the learners can do in the classroom? What type of assessment tasks can you really do in the classroom to ensure that the learners practice and then attain these competencies? All right. Next, the objective that we have here is understand information from a variety of sources for a specific purpose, and these are the competencies that the learners should be able to perform in order to attain this objective. And please go through them with your time. I cannot go through all of them. The other objective is to listen for pleasure. So listen to a variety of texts for pleasure, and these are some of them that they can do. And you can use some of this in the classroom, to really practice that, or you can assign this outside the classroom, and then they come and talk about whatever that they listen to in the classroom. And then here, listen to follow and carry out instruction. So follow direction. Listen to a text on various or similar themes in an oral text. Then identify and interpret instruction, words such as, do you understand? And then some of this, you can still relate back to the one-way and two-way, or one-way, which is non-participatory listening tasks, and then we have got the two-way. Do you understand? You can relate all these things. Like you can go back and then get ideas and then use them in the classroom to practice, to really practice to ensure that the learners have gained these competencies that are stipulated in the syllabus. Right? And then the next one is listen to evaluate. Again, you can always go back to the previous notes to ensure that you have ideas of what you can do in the classroom to carry out this objective, to ensure that the learners have attained this objective, as well as that they are able to perform these competencies. And then the last part here, we have got identify the gist or the essence of a lecture or speech or discussion, and the competencies that are required are select relevant key points, recall main points of oral presentation, for example, and then recognizing and identifying themes from text heard. Again, you can go back to the two-way, one-way. Do you understand? When I read this, I remember the tasks, examples of tasks that I have provided in previous slides in this under this topic. And I think in previous lesson, in part 2, I think that's where you do where you can get ideas from. And then interpret tone of the speaker. So these are now the competencies that they need to perform, or they should be able to do, to show that this objective had been attained. All right, so that's what we have there. And please make time to go and go through the syllabus, acquaint yourself with these competencies and competencies and objectives, and then think about them. How do you ensure that you know that the learners have attained these competencies as well as the objectives as a general, as a wider or general a capability that the learners need to show in within this term or time that they are spending with you teaching under the NSC CO level. All right, now we are moving on to the examination. How is the listening assessed during the examination? But this specific examination. Here, the assessment objective for listenings, there are 4, and the first one is identify and retrieve relevant information, facts, and details. The second one is understand ideas, opinion, and attitudes. Third, show understanding of the connection between ideas, opinion, and attitude. And fourth, understand what is implied but not actually stated. Right here, reading between the lines, such as the gist, the speaker's purpose, intention, speaker's emotion, situation, or place. All right, so those are the 4 assessment objectives. The learners should be able to perform this. They should be able to do all these 4 aspects when it comes to listening. In the examination, we have got a listening paper. All right, we have got the listening paper, paper 2. And during this paper, there are 5 tasks that the learners need to perform. And the tasks, you can see here we've got the tasks. And then here we've got the assessment objectives. So here L1, L1, 2. So here you can see the numbers, right? You can see the numbers here. And this is what it means here. Like, what are they assessing? So you can see here, they only look at assessment objective 1 and 2. Here 1 and 2. 1, 2, 3. Here 1, 2, 3, 4. And here 1, 2, 3, 4. And this paper is out of 40. And then it takes about 50 minutes to complete this paper. And as I've mentioned, we have got 5 tasks. Right? And here are the marks for each task. And here we are talking about the format of the tasks, as well as the type of text, listening text that they will hear during these different tasks. So the first task is the learner will listen to 4 short extracts and answer 2 open-ended questions. Each question, so 2 open-ended questions. So each question is worth 1 point. And then the question required short answers, and then 3 such as 3-word maximum per answer. And then what type of listening will they do? So it's 2 recorded monologue, for instance, which are about 60 to 70 words each, and then 2 recorded dialogues, which are about 100 to 120 words. And the text total, so for this task, is about 320 to 380 words. So that's what they will listen to, and then this is worth 8 marks. This task, the first task, is worth 8 marks. And then the second one is the candidate, the learner, will listen to a talk and complete gaps. So maximum 2 words or a number per gap. So they don't go beyond that. And then in notes or sentence. So it's like there's a gap in notes or sentence, and then they need to fill those gaps up. So what type of listening will they do is 1 formal or informal dialogue, which is about 300 to 325 to 375 words. And then this task is worth 8 marks. And then the third task, the candidate will listen to 6 extracts and match each speaker with an appropriate content or appropriate theme, for instance. And then 6 short extracts of about 480 to 550 words, and then each extract should be approximately 80 to 90 words, and then the max for this task is 6. All right, so that's what I need to do here. And then in the next one, so the learners in this task, they will listen to a discussion or interview between two speakers, and then they will answer 4 option multiple choice questions. Okay, so which means they will answer multiple choice questions with 4 options, so A, B, C, D, right? Rather than A, B, C, there should be 4 options. And then they would listen, for example, to a formal or informal discussion or interview, which is about 325 to 375 words. Okay, so it's the same length as this one, and the marks are 8. It's worth 8 marks. And then the last task is candidate will listen to a discussion, interview between 2 speakers, and then answer open-ended questions, including high-order questions, things like why and how, questions that they will need to listen to, which require a short response in either a phrase length or a short sentence. All right. The discussion that they will listen to or interview that they will listen to is about 350 to 400 words. And that discussion or interview could be a formal discussion or interview, it could be an informal discussion or an interview. And then this is worth 10 points, and all these points make up 40 points in a 50-minute paper 2 listening paper. All right, so that's what the examination will look like in the listening part. All right. In this lesson, we have covered the following parts: the interactive model of listening comprehension, the types of listening, classroom listening performance, the types of items and tasks for assessing listening skills, what are they, and the difference between skills and strategies. And then we look at the objectives and competencies that are entailed in this syllabus under listening. And then we looked at how the listening is assessed during the NSSCO examination. So much for taking time to listen to this lesson. And with that, we have come to the end of the 8th unit, teaching listening. Goodbye for now.